The deafening crack of Reverend Simmons's Bible slamming against the pulpit silenced the congregation of Central City, Colorado's first Methodist church, on that sweltering Sunday morning in 1876. Violet Nelson stood alone in the aisle, her shoulders squared despite the shame burning across her cheeks and the unmistakable swell beneath her dress that betrayed her secret to everyone present. The Lord's house has no place for women of loose virtue. Reverend Simmons's voice boomed through the chapel, each word striking Violet like physical blows. Exodus 20:14 commands us, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," yet here stands proof of sin among us. Violet's gaze remained fixed on the rough wooden floorboards, unable to meet the judgmental stares of neighbors and friends who had welcomed her into their community just 8 months prior. At 22, she had come to Central City seeking a fresh start after losing her parents to influenza back east. Now, 5 months with child and abandoned by the man who had promised her marriage, she found herself cast out once again. "I ask that you leave this house of worship," the Reverend continued, his gray beard quivering with righteous indignation. "Until you repent your sinful ways and give up the bastard child, you are not welcome among God's faithful." Whispers rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Hargrove, who had employed Violet at her boarding house, clutched her handkerchief to her mouth in horror. Even kindly old Dr. Thompson, who had confirmed Violet's pregnancy with sympathetic eyes just weeks ago, now looked away in discomfort. "I understand," Violet said, her voice remarkably steady despite the tears threatening to spill. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. With as much dignity as she could muster, she turned and walked toward the doors, her footsteps echoing in the terrible silence. Outside, the late April sun bore down mercilessly, as if heaven itself sought to punish her further. Violet paused on the church steps, momentarily blinded by the brightness and uncertain where to go. Mrs. Hargrove had made it clear that a woman in her condition could no longer work at the respectable establishment. Without employment or a place to live, her prospects in the mining town were bleak. "Folks don't seem too charitable for being fresh out of church," a deep voice remarked from nearby. Startled, Violet turned to find a tall figure leaning against the hitching post. Dust clung to his worn denim pants and faded blue shirt, marking him as a man who worked the land rather than the mines that had brought prosperity to Central City. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. "I don't need your judgment as well, sir," Violet replied, attempting to brush past him. The man straightened, and Violet could now see his features clearly. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with deep-set eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, save for the unusual gentleness in his expression. "No judgment from me, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Name's Wade McAllister. I run a small cattle operation outside town." He nodded toward the church. "Couldn't help overhearing the commotion." Violet's cheeks burned. "Then you know I'm not fit for decent company." "What I know," Wade said quietly, "is that God knows your heart better than any man behind that pulpit." His words caught her off guard, a kindness so unexpected that it threatened to unravel the composure she desperately clung to. Violet bit her lip, fighting back tears. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I'll manage," she answered automatically, though in truth, she had no idea what she would do. Her savings would afford perhaps 2 nights at the hotel, after which. Wade studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the church door where several congregants had appeared, watching their exchange with undisguised curiosity. "I've got a proposition for you, Miss Nelson. Violet Nelson. Miss Nelson. My sister passed last winter, leaving me with twin 5-year-old nieces. I need help looking after them and the house while I tend the cattle." He gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. "It's honest work with room and board. You'd have your own quarters in the house." Violet narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Why would you offer employment to someone in my condition? Someone you don't even know? Because those little girls need a woman's care, and I reckon you need somewhere safe to have your baby." His gaze was steady. "Besides, I've little patience for those who claim to speak for the Almighty while forgetting His teachings on compassion." A woman emerged from the church, whispering loudly to her companion while pointing in Violet's direction. Soon others would follow, and the idea of facing their contempt made her stomach churn. "How far is your ranch?" she asked, decision forming even as she spoke. "About 12 miles northwest. Not much to look at compared to some, but it's peaceful." He studied her pale face. "Would give you time to figure things out, away from prying eyes." Violet glanced back at the church that had rejected her, at the town that would now brand her a fallen woman. What choice did she really have? "Very well, Mr. McAllister. I accept your offer." Wade nodded once, then gestured toward his wagon. "Got your belongings at Mrs. Hargrove's boarding house. I doubt I'll be welcome to retrieve them." A muscle tightened in Wade's jaw. "We'll see about that." To Violet's surprise, Wade escorted her directly to the boarding house, his tall figure lending her a protection she hadn't expected. "Mrs. Hargrove blustered and protested, but something in Wade's quiet insistence, or perhaps his standing as a property owner, however modest, convinced the woman to allow Violet to collect her trunk and few personal items. Within the hour, they were leaving Central City behind, the wagon creaking beneath them as Wade's horses pulled steadily toward the foothills. Violet sat rigidly beside him, still stunned by the sudden change in her circumstances. The future remained terrifyingly uncertain, but at least she had bought herself some time. "Thank you," she said finally, breaking the silence between them. "Though I'm not sure you've done yourself any favors by associating with me." Wade kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Folks'll talk, then find something new to gossip about by next Sunday." He glanced briefly in her direction. "Truth is, I'm the one who's grateful. Those girls need more than I can give them." As the wagon crested a hill, Violet caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. Nestled in a small valley, the McAllister ranch was modest but well kept. A 2-story wooden house with a covered porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings surrounded by split rail fences. Beyond stretched meadows where cattle grazed, and behind it all rose the magnificent Rocky Mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the advancing spring. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's home," Wade replied simply. As they approached, 2 small figures burst from the house and raced toward the wagon, their identical faces alight with excitement. "Uncle Wade! Uncle Wade!" they called in unison, their dark braids bouncing with each step. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, scooping both girls into his arms with practiced ease. "Emma, Sarah, I want you to meet Miss Nelson. She's going to help look after you and the house." The twins regarded Violet with identical pairs of curious blue eyes. One of them Emma or Sarah, Violet couldn't yet tell which, noticed her swollen middle. "Are you having a baby?" she asked directly. Violet's heart sank. Would these children reject her too? "Yes," she answered honestly. "In about 4 months' time." The girl's eyes widened with interest rather than judgment. "Can I feel it, Sarah?" Wade admonished gently. "That's not polite to ask a lady you've just met." "It's all right," Violet said, carefully descending from the wagon with Wade's assistance. She guided Sarah's small hand to her belly. The baby's not big enough to feel moving yet, but soon. Both girls seemed fascinated rather than scandalized, and Violet felt a fraction of her tension ease. Children, at least, were free from the prejudices that adults harbored. "Let's get Miss Nelson settled," Wade said. "Emma, Sarah, run tell Mrs. Gunderson our guest has arrived." As the twins scampered back toward the house, Violet raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Gunderson, housekeeper," Wade explained, lifting Violet's trunk from the wagon. "Comes 3 days a week to help with cooking and washing. She's a widow from town, keeps to herself mostly. Good woman." Violet followed Wade to the house, taking in her new surroundings. The porch was swept clean, with 2 rocking chairs facing the valley. Inside, the home was simply furnished but comfortable. A large kitchen and dining area, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, and a study lined with more books than she would have expected a rancher to possess. "Girls sleep upstairs, first room on the right," Wade explained as he showed her through the house. "Mrs. Gunderson uses the room next to them when she stays over. My room's at the end of the hall." He led her to a door off the main sitting area. "This will be yours. It was my sister's sewing room, but we've put a bed in for you." The room was small but pleasant, with a window overlooking a kitchen garden and the mountains beyond. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner, a washstand another. A rocking chair sat near the window, a basket of mending beside it. "It's perfect," Violet said, genuinely touched by the effort that had clearly been made. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Wade," he corrected. "If you're to live here, there's no need for formalities." He set her trunk down. "I'll let you get settled. Supper's at 6. After Wade left, closing the door behind him, Violet sank onto the bed and finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back all day to flow freely. How quickly life could change in the span of a few hours. She had gone from respected member of the community to outcast, from secure employment to complete dependence on the kindness of a stranger. And yet, as she looked around the small room that was now hers, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Here, miles from the judgment of Central City, perhaps she could find a way forward for herself and her child. The weeks that followed settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Violet rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for Wade before he headed out to work the cattle. After he departed, she would wake the twins, help them dress, and oversee their morning lessons. Though she had no formal training as a teacher, her own education had been thorough enough to manage basic arithmetic, reading, and writing for 5-year-olds. In the afternoons, when the girls napped, Violet tended the kitchen garden or assisted Mrs. Gunderson with household tasks. The older woman had initially regarded Violet with suspicion, but her competence and willingness to work had gradually earned the housekeeper's grudging respect. "At least you're not afraid to get your hands dirty," Mrs. Gunderson remarked one day as they hung laundry together. "Last girl Mr. McAllister brought out to mind the children barely lasted a week. City girl, all airs and no substance." "Mr. McAllister has hired others before me?" Violet asked, surprised. 3 since his sister passed," Mrs. Gunderson confirmed. "None worked out. Too isolated out here for most young women, especially with no husband prospects nearby." She gave Violet a pointed look. "Though I suppose that's not your concern at present." Violet felt her cheeks warm but chose not to respond to the implied judgment. Mrs. Gunderson, for all her initial frostiness, had not treated Violet with the outright contempt she had faced in town. Wade himself remained something of a mystery. He left before dawn most days and often returned after the girls were asleep. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but reserved. Occasionally, Violet would find him in the study late at night, reading by lamplight, but their conversations rarely progressed beyond practical matters concerning the household or the twins. The girls, however, had attached themselves to Violet with the uncomplicated affection of children. They delighted in helping her in the garden, listening to stories, and especially feeling the baby move once it became active enough to detect from outside. "What will you name it?" Emma asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "I'm not certain yet," Violet admitted. "I thought perhaps Daniel for a boy after my father." "And if it's a girl," Sarah pressed, her small hand resting on Violet's growing belly. Violet hesitated. "Rebecca, maybe. It means to bind or to connect. I like the meaning." "Our mama's name was Catherine," Emma offered solemnly, "but Uncle Wade calls her Katie in the stories." "He tells you stories about your mother?" Violet asked gently. Both girls nodded. "So we don't forget," Sarah explained. "Uncle Wade says memories are precious things and we're too little to have many of our own of Mama." Violet's heart ached for these children who, like her, had lost their parents too soon. "Your uncle is very wise," she said softly. "He's the best uncle in the whole world," Emma declared with absolute conviction. "He says God put us in his care, and he takes that very seriously." The simple faith of the child struck Violet deeply. How different Wade's understanding of God seemed from Reverend Simmons's harsh judgments. In the weeks since leaving Central City, she had found herself reconsidering her relationship with Faith, not abandoning it, as she might have expected, but finding a quieter, more personal connection that had nothing to do with Sunday services or public displays of piety. One evening in early June, nearly 6 weeks after Violet's arrival at the ranch, she was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Wade joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to her before settling into the second rocking chair. "The girls asleep?" he asked, his voice low in the gathering twilight. Violet nodded. "They were exhausted from helping me plant the bean seedlings today." A comfortable silence stretched between them as they sipped their coffee and watched the last light fade from the mountains. Fireflies began to appear in the meadow beyond the house, their tiny lights blinking like earthbound stars. "I received a letter from Dr. Thompson today," Wade said finally. Violet tensed. The doctor had been one of the few people in town who had shown her kindness, but his presence at the church during her public shaming still stung. "He's offered to attend you when your time comes," Wade continued. "Says he feels it's the least he can do, considering." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Considering he sat silently while Reverend Simmons cast me out," Violet finished for him, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Wade turned to look at her directly, his expression serious in the fading light. "I can find another doctor if you prefer. There's a woman in Black Hawk who midwives, less training but more experience with birthing from what I hear." The consideration in his offer touched her. "No, Dr. Thompson is a good physician. I'm grateful he's willing to come all this way." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Did his letter mention how people in town speak of me?" Wade's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around his coffee cup. "Some gossip, as expected, nothing worth repeating." His evasiveness told her enough. "And of you?" "For harboring me." "I've never much cared what Central City thinks of me," he replied with a hint of amusement. "Being 5 miles from the nearest neighbor has its advantages. Even so, I'm sorry to have brought scandal to your doorstep," Violet said quietly. "You and the girls don't deserve that." Wade set his cup down on the small table between them and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Miss Nelson, Violet, you have nothing to apologize for. The way I see it, there's only one person who should be apologizing, and he's not here." The mention, however indirect, of her child's father made Violet's chest tighten. "No, he's not." The man who Wade paused, choosing his words carefully. "The father of your child, will he be coming for you?" Violet laughed, a short, brittle sound unlike her normal voice. "Charles Whitfield is likely halfway to California by now, if he kept to his plans. He was passing through Central City on business, or so he claimed. He spoke of marriage, of taking me with him when he returned west." She shook her head at her own naivety. "By the time I discovered my condition, he was long gone. No forwarding address." "A coward," Wade said, his usual gentle tone hardening. "A businessman," Violet corrected, though without conviction. "I was foolish to believe his promises." Wade was quiet for so long that Violet thought the conversation had ended. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "My sister Catherine, the twins' mother, was abandoned too. Their father left when she told him she was expecting. Couldn't handle the responsibility of one child, let alone two." He looked out at the darkened valley. "She came here, just like you, in need of shelter and family. I would give anything to have her back with us." The raw emotion in his voice moved Violet deeply. "You've given the girls a wonderful home," she said softly. "They adore you." "They need more than I can give them," Wade admitted. "A woman's guidance, someone to teach them things I don't know." "You're doing an admirable job," Violet assured him. "They're happy, well-mannered children." "Thanks to you these past weeks." Wade turned to her, his expression earnest in the dim light from the house windows. "I want you to know that you and your baby have a place here, Violet, not just until the birth. After too, if you wish it." His offer stunned her into momentary silence. "That's very generous," she finally managed. "But I couldn't impose indefinitely. Once the baby comes, I'll need to find a way to support us both." "It wouldn't be an imposition. The girls need you. The ranch needs you." He paused, then added quietly, "And if I'm being honest, I've grown accustomed to having you here as well." Something warm unfurled in Violet's chest, a feeling she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she should welcome. "Thank you," she said carefully. "I'll consider it." Wade seemed to sense her hesitation and didn't press further. He rose from his chair, collecting both their empty cups. "It's getting late. I have to ride out early tomorrow to check the north pasture fences." "Good night, Wade," Violet said, remaining on the porch as he went inside. Alone in the summer darkness, Violet placed her hands on her rounded belly, feeling the gentle movements of the life within. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't shrouded in uncertainty and fear. A future here, on this peaceful ranch, with the twins she had come to love and the quiet, thoughtful man who had offered her sanctuary when everyone else had turned away. It was a dangerous dream, she knew. Wade's kindness didn't necessarily indicate deeper feelings, and she had been burned badly enough by false promises to be wary. Yet as the night settled around her, Violet found herself hoping in a way she hadn't dared in months. The summer days lengthened and grew hotter as June gave way to July. Violet's pregnancy advanced steadily, her body growing heavier and more ungainly with each passing week. Dr. Thompson visited twice, pronouncing both mother and child healthy despite the difficult circumstances. During his second visit, he pulled Wade aside for a private conversation that left the rancher looking thoughtful. "What did the doctor say to you?" Violet asked later, as they sat shelling peas on the porch to escape the heat of the kitchen. Wade's hands stilled momentarily. "He suggested I consider making our arrangement more permanent." Violet nearly dropped the bowl in her lap. "I beg your pardon." "For the sake of propriety," Wade clarified quickly, returning his attention to the peas. "And the children, yours and the twins, he thinks it would be better if we married." Violet finished for him when he seemed unable to complete the thought. Her heart was suddenly pounding uncomfortably fast. Wade nodded, still not meeting her eyes. It was just a suggestion. I told him we hadn't discussed anything of the sort. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the soft sound of pea pods opening and the distant laughter of the twins playing in the yard with the ranch dog, Rusty. It would be a practical solution, Wade said finally, his voice carefully neutral. The girls are already attached to you. Your child would have a name and a home, and it would quiet the gossip in town. A marriage of convenience, Violet murmured, trying to ignore the strange disappointment that settled in her chest. Of course, that was all it would be. Wade was a kind man who saw a way to help her while solving his own problem of childcare for the twins. It was sensible, practical. The fact that her heart might want something more was irrelevant. We get along well enough, Wade continued, seemingly encouraged by her lack of outright rejection. I believe we could make a comfortable life together. Violet looked out at the mountains, considering his words. A comfortable life was more than she had dared hope for just months ago. She would be a fool to turn down such an offer, especially with a baby coming and few other prospects. May I think about it? She asked finally. Of course. Wade rose, collecting the bowl of shelled peas. There's no rush to decide. But there was, Violet knew. Her child would arrive in less than 2 months, and decisions would need to be made before then. Still, she couldn't bring herself to accept Wade's proposal, if it could even be called that, without being certain it was the right choice for everyone involved. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Violet sat at the small desk in her room and began a letter to her cousin in Boston, the only family she had left. She had written previously of her situation, receiving a sympathetic response but no invitation to come east. Now, she outlined Wade's proposal, seeking advice or perhaps just clarification of her own confused feelings. I believe he is a good man, she wrote, kind and honorable in his way. The girls adore him, and he has shown me nothing but respect and consideration since bringing me to his home. Yet I cannot help wondering if I would be doing him a disservice by accepting. He deserves a wife who comes to him without complications, without another man's child to raise. And I. Violet paused, pen hovering over the paper. What did she deserve? After her fall from grace, she had stopped believing she deserved anything at all. But in these months at the McAllister ranch, something had begun to heal inside her, not just her shattered pride, but her sense of self-worth. And I, she continued finally, find myself hoping for more than mere convenience in a marriage. Perhaps that is foolish, given my circumstances, but it is the truth. 3 days later, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Violet was in the kitchen, teaching the twins to make bread, when the sound of hoofbeats drew their attention. Through the window, she saw a rider approaching a woman, to her surprise, dressed in practical riding clothes but with an unmistakable air of refinement. "Who's that?" Emma asked, standing on tiptoes to peer outside. "I don't know," Violet admitted, hastily wiping flour from her hands. "Stay here while I greet our visitor." By the time Violet reached the porch, the woman had dismounted and was tying her horse to the hitching post. She was strikingly beautiful, with golden hair arranged in a neat bun and clear blue eyes that assessed Violet with frank curiosity. "Good afternoon," Violet called. "Can I help you?" The woman approached, removing her riding gloves. "I'm looking for Wade McAllister. Is he available?" "He's out with the cattle," Violet explained. "Expected back before supper. May I tell him who called?" "Victoria Pearson," the woman replied. "An old friend. And you must be the young woman I've heard so much about." Violet stiffened slightly. "You've heard of me?" Victoria smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Central City is a small place, Miss Nelson. News travels. She glanced pointedly at Violet's prominent belly, especially news of this nature. Before Violet could respond to this barely veiled barb, the twins burst from the house, faces and hands still dusted with flour. "Miss Victoria!" they cried in unison, running to embrace the visitor. "Emma, Sarah." Victoria's demeanor softened as she bent to hug the girls. "My, how you've grown since Christmas. Are you staying for supper?" Sarah asked eagerly. "We're making bread," Emma added, displaying her floury hands as evidence. Victoria laughed, a musical sound. "That depends on your uncle. I need to speak with him about some important business." Violet felt distinctly uncomfortable with the easy familiarity between this elegant woman and the twins. "Would you like to come inside and wait?" she offered, her manners overriding her unease. "I could prepare some tea." "That would be lovely," Victoria replied with impeccable politeness. "Thank you." Inside, as Violet busied herself with the tea kettle, Victoria settled at the kitchen table, the twins vying for positions on either side of her. It was clear they were fond of this visitor, and equally clear that Victoria knew her way around the McAllister household. She asked detailed questions about their lessons and activities, displaying an intimate knowledge of their lives that made Violet's stomach twist with an emotion she didn't care to name. "Miss Nelson is having a baby," Sarah informed Victoria solemnly. "We get to help choose names." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile remained fixed. "How nice. And what names have you suggested, Sarah?" As the child launched into an increasingly fanciful list of potential baby names, Victoria's gaze met Violet's over the tea service. There was something calculating in those blue eyes, an assessment being made that made Violet feel exposed and vulnerable. "The twins seem quite attached to you," Victoria observed when the girls finally paused for breath. "They're wonderful children," Violet replied carefully. "It's been a joy getting to know them. Indeed, Wade has done remarkably well with them considering the circumstances." Victoria accepted the cup Violet offered. "He's a special man, loyal to a fault, especially to family." The emphasis on the word family was subtle but unmistakable. This woman was staking a claim, Violet realized, or at least warning her off one. "Mr. McAllister has been very kind to offer me employment and shelter," Violet said, choosing her words with care. "I'm grateful for his generosity." Victoria's smile turned knowing. "Wade has always had a soft spot for those in need. It's one of his most admirable qualities and occasionally his greatest weakness." Before Violet could formulate a response to this thinly veiled insult, the sound of the front door opening announced Wade's return. He appeared in the kitchen doorway a moment later, his expression shifting from surprise to something more complex when he saw Victoria seated at his table. "Vicky," he said, removing his hat, "this is unexpected." Victoria rose gracefully. "Wade, darling, I needed to speak with you about the Independence Day celebration. The committee is counting on your participation." She crossed to him and placed a familiar hand on his arm. "You know how much everyone enjoys your contribution to the fireworks display." Wade's eyes flicked to Violet, then back to Victoria. "I hadn't planned on attending this year. There's too much to do here." "Nonsense," Victoria insisted. "It's tradition. The girls look forward to it every year, don't you?" She turned to the twins, who nodded enthusiastically. "Fireworks, Uncle Wade," Emma pleaded. "And lemonade and pie contests." Wade's resistance visibly wavered. "It's a long trip to town with the girls." "The celebration is at my father's estate this year," Victoria informed him smoothly. "Just 4 miles from here, much more convenient." She glanced at Violet. "Of course your housekeeper is welcome to join us if her condition permits." The slight pause before housekeeper and the doubtful tone regarding Violet's pregnancy made the invitation feel more like an exclusion. Violet found herself straightening, determined not to show how deeply the subtle slight had cut. "That's very kind," she said evenly, "but I think it best if I remain here. The journey might be too taxing in my condition, as you say." Victoria's smile was triumphant. "As you wish. Wade, perhaps we could discuss the details privately. I'm sure Miss Nelson has household duties to attend to." Before Wade could respond, Violet excused herself, directing the twins to return to their bread-making. She caught a glimpse of Wade's troubled expression as Victoria led him toward his study, but she kept her own features carefully neutral as she focused on helping the girls shape their dough into small loaves. That evening, after Victoria had departed and the twins were in bed, Wade found Violet on the porch, her customary retreat when she needed to think. "I'm sorry about Victoria's visit," he said without preamble, settling into the chair beside her. "There's no need to apologize," Violet replied, keeping her voice light. "She seems very devoted to you and the girls," Wade sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Victoria and I grew up together. Our families were neighbors before her father struck it rich in the silver mines. We were close once." "She's in love with you," Violet stated simply, surprising herself with her directness. Wade looked startled, then contemplative. "She believes she is," he conceded. "Her father has been pushing for a match between us for years. It would be convenient for everyone involved, except perhaps Victoria herself." "You don't return her feelings?" Violet asked, trying to ignore the flicker of hope that ignited within her. "Victoria deserves someone who can give her his whole heart," Wade said carefully. "I care for her as a friend, nothing more." They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the gentle creaking of their rocking chairs and the distant call of a night hawk. "About Dr. Thompson's suggestion," Wade began. "I've been thinking about it," Violet interrupted. "It's a generous offer, Wade, truly. But I can't accept," Wade stilled. "May I ask why?" Violet took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Because it wouldn't be fair to you. You deserve more than a marriage of convenience to a fallen woman carrying another man's child." "That's not how I see you," Wade protested, leaning forward in his chair. "It's how the world sees me," Violet countered. "How Victoria sees me, how Central City sees me, and eventually it might be how you see me too." She swallowed hard against the tightness in her throat. "I won't trap you in a marriage based on pity." "Pity?" Wade sounded genuinely perplexed. "Is that what you think this is?" "What else could it be?" Violet asked softly. Wade was quiet for so long that Violet thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intent. "When I found you on those church steps, I saw a woman of extraordinary courage, standing alone against the judgment of an entire town. In the months since, I've watched you rebuild your life with grace and dignity, despite circumstances that would break many." He turned to face her directly. "It's not pity I feel for you, Violet. It's admiration, respect, and something else I hadn't expected to find again after losing Katie and the girl's father." Violet's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" Wade reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. "I'm saying that if you'll have me, I'd like to marry you not out of convenience or obligation, but because I've come to care for you deeply." The simple honesty in his voice undid her. Tears welled in Violet's eyes and spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Hey now," Wade said gently, producing a handkerchief from his pocket. "That wasn't meant to make you cry." Violet accepted the handkerchief with a watery laugh. "Pregnant women cry at everything, haven't you heard?" She wiped her cheeks, then looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. There was none. Are you certain, Wade? Your life would be so much simpler without us. Simpler, maybe, but a lot emptier. Wade squeezed her hand. I'm certain. The question is, are you? Could you see yourself building a life here with me and the girls? In that moment, Violet realized that she had been imagining exactly that for weeks now, a future on this ranch, watching the twins grow, raising her child alongside them, with Wade as their steady center. The vision had seemed an impossible dream, but now it was being offered to her in earnest. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Yes, I could see that very clearly. Wade's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features, making him look younger and almost boyish. Then we have an understanding, Miss Nelson. We do, Mr. McAllister, she replied, returning his smile through the last of her tears. 2 weeks later, on a clear Sunday morning in late July, Violet Nelson became Violet McAllister in a simple ceremony performed by a circuit-riding preacher who asked no questions about her condition. The twins served as flower girls, solemnly dropping wildflower petals along the path to the large oak tree where Wade awaited his bride. Mrs. Gunderson and a few of Wade's neighboring ranchers stood as witnesses, their presence a testament to his standing in the community outside Central City. Violet wore a dress of pale blue muslin, hastily altered to accommodate her advanced pregnancy. As she approached Wade beneath the oak, she thought of how different this day was from that terrible Sunday in April when she had been cast out of the church. Instead of judgment, she was surrounded by acceptance. Instead of shame, she felt a cautious joy blooming within her. The preacher's words were traditional but delivered with genuine warmth. When it came time for the vows, Wade's steady voice never faltered. His promise to love and cherish her in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, spoken with conviction. Violet's own voice trembled slightly, but her heart was certain as she pledged herself to this man who had seen her worth when others saw only her mistakes. By the power vested in me, the preacher concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. McAllister, you may kiss your bride. Wade's kiss was gentle but unmistakably fervent, a promise of the deeper connection they would build in the days and years to come. When they parted, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Hello, Mrs. McAllister, he murmured, for her ears alone. The simple meal that followed on the ranch house lawn was festive despite its modesty. Mrs. Gunderson had outdone herself with a wedding cake decorated with fresh berries, and one of the neighboring ranchers brought a fiddle, filling the afternoon with music that soon had the twins spinning in circles of uninhibited joy. As the celebration continued, Violet found a moment to slip away to the porch, needing a brief respite from the unaccustomed merriment. She had just settled into her usual rocking chair when Wade joined her, carrying 2 pieces of cake. Hiding from our own wedding, he teased, handing her a plate. Just catching my breath, Violet assured him, gratefully accepting the cake. It's been a perfect day, Wade, more than I ever thought possible. It's just the beginning, he said, taking the seat beside her. Though I should warn you, married life with me won't always be this exciting. Mostly it's cattle and children, and trying to make the land yield enough to see us through winter. That sounds wonderful to me, Violet said sincerely. After the turmoil of the past months, the prospect of quiet routine with this man and their blended family was exactly what she craved. Wade studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I have something for you, he said finally, reaching into his vest pocket. He withdrew a small leather pouch and handed it to her. Violet opened it carefully, tipping the contents into her palm. A delicate gold ring set with a single small pearl gleamed in the afternoon light. It was my mother's, Wade explained. I'm sorry I didn't have it for the ceremony. It needed cleaning and sizing. It's beautiful, Violet whispered, touched beyond words that he would give her such a family heirloom. Wade took the ring from her palm and slid it onto her finger beside the simple gold band they had exchanged during the ceremony. A perfect fit, he observed with satisfaction. Thank you, Violet said, blinking back tears for what felt like the 100th time that day. For everything, Wade. For seeing more in me than my mistakes. God knows your heart, Wade replied simply. I'm just fortunate enough to have been given the chance to know it too. From the yard came the sound of the twins calling for them, eager to begin a game that apparently required the participation of both bride and groom. Wade rose and offered Violet his hand, which she took without hesitation, allowing him to help her to her feet. Shall we, Mrs. McAllister? He asked with a smile. Lead the way, Mr. McAllister, she replied, and together they rejoined their celebration and the beginning of their life together. August arrived with relentless heat and afternoon thunderstorms that temporarily cooled the air before leaving everything steaming in their wake. Violet's pregnancy had reached its final, most uncomfortable stage, her body ungainly and her movements increasingly limited. Despite her condition, she insisted on maintaining her role in the household, though Wade and even Mrs. Gunderson frequently urged her to rest more. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, Wade informed her one evening after finding her preserving the last of the summer berries, despite the heat of the kitchen and her obvious exhaustion. Determined, Violet corrected with a smile. There's a difference. Wade shook his head but couldn't hide his admiration. The berries would have waited until morning. But my patience wouldn't have, Violet replied, wiping perspiration from her brow with the back of her wrist. She winced suddenly as the baby delivered a particularly forceful kick to her ribs. Wade was at her side in an instant, his hand warm and supportive against her lower back. All right, Violet nodded, catching her breath. Just reminding me who's really in charge. Come sit down, Wade coaxed, guiding her to a kitchen chair. Dr. Thompson will be out first thing tomorrow to check on you. He thinks it won't be long now. Another 2 weeks, by my calculations, Violet said, though privately she wondered if it might be sooner. The baby had dropped lower in her pelvis, and she had been experiencing practice contractions with increasing frequency. Wade pulled up a chair across from her, taking her hands in his. Though they had been married for nearly 3 weeks, their relationship remained in many ways as it had been before, affectionate but restrained, each still learning the boundaries of their new connection. Wade had insisted on continuing to sleep in his upstairs room while Violet remained in her downstairs bedroom, a gesture of respect for her condition that she appreciated even as she sometimes longed for greater closeness. Are you afraid? He asked quietly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Violet considered the question honestly. Yes, she admitted. Not so much of the pain, though I don't look forward to that, but of all that comes after, being responsible for a new life. She looked up at him. Are you having second thoughts about raising another man's child as your own? Not for a single moment, Wade answered without hesitation. This baby is a part of you, Violet. That's all that matters to me. His simple acceptance brought tears to her eyes. Pregnancy had made her emotions unpredictable, tears springing up at the slightest provocation, but the depth of her feeling for this man was real and growing stronger each day. I'm very lucky to have found you, she said softly. Wade raised her hand to his lips. I'm the fortunate one, he countered. Now, will you please allow yourself to rest? The twins and I can manage dinner. Violet laughed at the image of Wade and the 5-year-olds attempting to prepare a meal. Perhaps Mrs. Gunderson left something we could warm up, she suggested diplomatically. That night, as Violet prepared for bed, the first real contraction seized her, strong enough to make her gasp and grip the bedpost for support. When it passed, she sat on the edge of her bed, heart racing. It could still be false labor, she reasoned. Better to wait and see if another came before alarming Wade. Within 20 minutes, a second contraction gripped her, and Violet knew with certainty that her time had come. The baby was arriving nearly 2 weeks early. Moving carefully, she made her way to the bottom of the stairs. "Wade," she called, wincing at how her voice wavered. "Wade, I need you." His response was immediate, footsteps hurrying along the upstairs hallway and down the stairs. He appeared in his nightshirt, hair tousled from sleep, but eyes instantly alert at the sight of her leaning against the banister. "The baby?" he asked. Though it was hardly a question, Violet nodded, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace as another contraction began. Wade was beside her instantly, supporting her weight as she breathed through the pain. "Let's get you back to bed," he said when it had passed. "I'll ride for Dr. Thompson." "It's the middle of the night," Violet protested weakly, "and there's a storm coming." Indeed, distant thunder could be heard rolling across the mountains. "All the more reason to go now before it hits," Wade countered, helping her back to her room. "First babies often take their time. The doctor will be here long before things get serious." But Violet's body had other plans. By the time Wade had helped her into bed and lit the lamps, her contractions were coming regularly, less than 10 minutes apart. The baby was moving fast, too fast for Wade to make the journey to town and back with the doctor in time. "Wade," she said, gripping his arm as another contraction released her. "You can't go. There's no time." He looked stricken. "Violet, you need a doctor. What I need is you," she insisted. "Mrs. Gunderson said she's helped deliver babies before. Send one of the hands for her, she's closer than town, and have him continue to the doctor's after." Wade hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll be right back," he promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead before hurrying to wake one of the ranch hands who slept in the bunkhouse. The next hours passed in a blur of increasing pain for Violet. Mrs. Gunderson arrived just as the storm broke over the ranch, rain lashing at the windows and lightning illuminating the room in brief, stark flashes. The older woman took charge with brisk efficiency, directing Wade to boil water and bring clean linens while she examined Violet. "Moving right along, this one is," Mrs. Gunderson announced, eager to meet the world. Wade returned with the requested supplies, his face pale but determined. "What can I do?" he asked. Mrs. Gunderson considered him critically. "Most men wait outside at this point." "I'm staying," Wade said firmly, meeting Violet's eyes. "If you want me to, please," Violet whispered, reaching for his hand as another contraction built. This one was different, stronger, more insistent, accompanied by an overwhelming urge to push. "It's time, Mrs. Gunderson confirmed after checking Violet again. "When the next pain comes, bear down with all your might, child." What followed was the most intense experience of Violet's life, pain beyond anything she had imagined, yet purposeful in a way that allowed her to channel her strength rather than be overcome by it. Wade remained steadfast beside her, supporting her back when she needed to sit up, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement even as his own face reflected concern and wonder in equal measure. Outside, the storm raged, thunder seeming to echo Violet's cries as she labored to bring new life into the world. And then, in a final surge of effort that took everything she had, her child slipped free, announcing its arrival with a lusty, indignant wail that rose above the storm. "A boy, Mrs. Gunderson proclaimed, quickly wrapping the red-faced, squalling infant in a clean towel. "And a fine set of lungs on him." Violet fell back against the pillows, exhausted but desperate to see her son. "Let me hold him," she pleaded, Mrs. Gunderson efficiently cleaned and swaddled the baby before placing him in Violet's waiting arms. The moment his warm weight settled against her chest, Violet was overcome with a love so powerful it took her breath away. He was perfect, tiny fingers curled into fists, a shock of dark hair plastered to his head, his face still scrunched in protest at his abrupt entry into the world. "Hello, Daniel," she whispered, the name she had chosen for a son coming naturally to her lips. "I'm your mother." At the sound of her voice, the baby's cries subsided, and he blinked up at her with unfocused eyes. Violet looked up to find Wade watching them, his expression a complex mixture of awe and tenderness. "Would you like to hold him?" she offered softly. Wade hesitated only briefly before carefully gathering the swaddled infant from her arms. His large hands cradled the small bundle with surprising gentleness as he gazed down at the newborn's face. "Hello, Daniel McAllister," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the family." The simple words, so sincere and welcoming, brought fresh tears to Violet's eyes. In that moment, watching her husband hold her son as if he were his own, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not in the judgmental confines of Central City's church, but here, in this home, Wade had built with his own hands, with the family they were creating together. Dr. Thompson arrived an hour later, soaking wet and apologetic for his tardiness. After examining both mother and child, he pronounced them in excellent health. "A remarkable delivery by all accounts," he said, accepting the coffee Mrs. Gunderson pressed into his hands. "First babies rarely come so quickly or easily. Nothing about this child has followed the expected path," Violet replied with a tired smile, gazing down at Daniel, now sleeping peacefully in a cradle Wade had made during her pregnancy. "The twins are beside themselves with excitement," Wade informed her, returning from checking on the girls, who had been awakened by the commotion. "They're demanding to meet their new brother immediately." "In the morning," Dr. Thompson advised. "Mother and child need rest now." But Violet couldn't bear to disappoint the girls. "Let them come in just for a moment," she requested. "They're part of this too." Wade brought the twins in, both in their nightgowns with sleep tousled hair, their eyes wide with anticipation. They approached the bed where Violet lay with exaggerated caution, as if afraid she might break. "Is that the baby?" Emma whispered, peering into the cradle. "This is your brother, Daniel," Violet confirmed. "Would you like to see him closer?" At their eager nods, Wade lifted Daniel from his cradle and sat on the edge of the bed, positioning himself so the twins could see the baby's face. Their expressions of wonder and immediate acceptance were everything Violet could have hoped for. "He's so tiny," Sarah marveled. "But he'll grow," Emma assured her sister with the confidence of additional minutes of age. "Uncle Wade, I mean, Papa says all babies start small." The casual way Emma used Wade's new title Papa caught Violet by surprise. She looked at Wade, who appeared equally moved by the child's easy acceptance of their new family arrangement. "That's right," he confirmed, his voice steady despite the emotion Violet could see in his eyes. "He'll grow faster than you can imagine. And you two will be the best big sisters a boy could ask for." The twins beamed with pride at this responsibility, each carefully touching one of Daniel's tiny hands before Wade shooed them back to bed with promises of a proper introduction in the morning, when the room had cleared of visitors. Dr. Thompson departing for the guest room to get some rest before returning to town, Mrs. Gunderson retiring to her room, and the twins finally settled, Wade returned to Violet's bedside. "You should sleep," he urged, seeing her fighting to keep her eyes open. You've done amazing work today. Stay with me, Violet asked, suddenly unwilling to be separated from him even by the width of the house. Wade's expression softened. Of course. He settled into the chair beside her bed, reaching out to take her hand. Within moments, Violet drifted into exhausted sleep, anchored by the warm strength of his hand around hers and the soft, rhythmic breathing of her newborn son. The weeks following Daniel's birth were a blur of adjustment and discovery for the newly expanded McAllister family. The baby thrived under the combined attention of his mother, the adoring twins, and Wade, who proved surprisingly adept at infant care despite his initial nervousness. "You're a natural," Violet observed one evening as Wade paced the floor with a fussing Daniel, the baby quieting almost immediately in his strong arms. "Had some practice with the twins," Wade replied modestly, "though I don't recall them being quite this small." He looked down at the now peaceful infant with undisguised affection. "He has your eyes, I think." It was true as Daniel's features became more defined. It was clear he had inherited Violet's deep brown eyes and the same slight dimple in his left cheek when he smiled. There was nothing of Charles Whitfield visible in the child, a fact for which Violet was privately grateful. It made it easier for Wade to claim Daniel as his own, not just legally but in his heart as well. By mid-September, life had settled into a new routine. The nights were growing cooler, the aspens in the higher elevations beginning to turn gold against the evergreens. Wade was busy with preparations for winter, ensuring the cattle were healthy and the hay stores sufficient, while Violet gradually resumed her household duties, Daniel often sleeping contentedly in a sling across her chest. One crisp morning, Violet was hanging laundry in the yard, Daniel asleep in his cradle nearby, when she spotted a rider approaching. It took her a moment to recognize Victoria Pearson, whom they hadn't seen since before the wedding. Violet's hand stilled on the damp sheet she was pinning to the line, a flicker of apprehension passing through her. Victoria dismounted gracefully and approached, her riding habit as impeccable as ever. "Mrs. McAllister," she greeted Violet, the title sounding strange on her lips. "Miss Pearson," Violet returned evenly. "This is a surprise." Victoria's gaze traveled to the cradle where Daniel slept. "I heard your child had arrived, a boy, I understand." "Yes, Daniel, he's 6 weeks old now." Violet moved slightly, positioning herself between Victoria and the cradle in an instinctive gesture of protection. If Victoria noticed, she gave no indication. "I've come to speak with Wade, actually. Is he available?" "He's checking fence lines in the north pasture today," Violet replied. "I don't expect him back until supper time." Victoria's lips thinned slightly in disappointment. "I see. Perhaps I could leave a message for him." "Of course," Violet said, though her wariness remained. "Would you like to come inside? I can offer you tea." To her surprise, Victoria accepted, following Violet into the house after a brief, curious glance into the cradle at the sleeping infant. Inside, the twins were practicing their letters at the kitchen table under Mrs. Gunderson's supervision. They greeted Victoria with their usual enthusiasm, which she returned with genuine warmth before accepting a seat and the offered tea. "The girls look well," Victoria observed after Mrs. Gunderson had taken them to another room to continue their lessons. "Happy." "They are," Violet confirmed, pouring the tea. "They've been wonderful with Daniel, very protective big sisters." Victoria studied her over the rim of her teacup. "And you? Motherhood agrees with you very much," Violet answered honestly. Despite the sleepless nights and constant demands of a newborn, she had never been happier or more fulfilled. "And Wade, is he?" Victoria hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "Is he content with this arrangement?" Violet set down her cup carefully. My marriage is not an arrangement, Miss Pearson. Wade and I are building a life together with all 3 children. Of course, Victoria replied smoothly, though her eyes remained sharp. It's just that Wade has always been so honorable, ready to take responsibility even when it isn't his to bear. The implication was clear, and Violet felt a surge of protectiveness not just for herself or Daniel, but for Wade as well. My husband, she said deliberately, makes his own choices. He chose this family, Miss Pearson, all of us. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a slight softening or perhaps just resignation. Yes, I suppose he did, she sighed, setting down her teacup. In truth, Mrs. McAllister, I came to say goodbye. My father has business interests in Denver that require his attention, and I've decided to accompany him. We leave next week. I see, Violet said, surprised by this news. Will you be gone long, indefinitely? Victoria replied. Denver offers more opportunities for a woman in my position. She smiled thinly. Central City has become rather limiting. Violet recognized the admission for what it was. Victoria was cutting her losses, acknowledging that Wade was truly lost to her. It was a graceful retreat in its way. I wish you well in Denver, Violet said sincerely. It's a growing city from what I hear. Indeed. Victoria rose, smoothing her skirts. Please tell Wade I called and that I. She paused, something vulnerable flickering across her face. Tell him I hope he finds all the happiness he deserves. With that, she departed, leaving Violet thoughtful as she watched the elegant figure mount her horse and ride away. There was something final in Victoria's goodbye, a closing of a chapter in Wade's life that, Violet realized, had needed to end for their own story to truly begin. When Wade returned that evening, dusty and tired from a day of physical labor, Violet recounted Victoria's visit as they sat together on the porch after the children were asleep. Denver, Wade mused, leaning back in his chair. That's probably for the best. Her father's been trying to get her to consider other suitors for months. She still cares for you, Violet observed quietly. Wade nodded. I know. But she'll find someone who can give her what she deserves, a whole heart, not just friendship and history. And have you given your whole heart away, Mr. McAllister? Violet asked, the question lighter than the weight it carried. Wade turned to her, his expression serious in the gathering twilight. I think you know the answer to that, Mrs. McAllister. He reached for her hand, and they sat in companionable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear mountain sky. It was enough, Violet thought. This quiet understanding between them, this partnership that had grown into something deeper than she had dared to hope for when she first arrived at his door. As autumn deepened into winter, the McAllister ranch prepared for the season of snow and isolation that would follow. Wade worked from dawn to dusk, bringing in the last hay, ensuring the barns were secure, and stockpiling supplies that would see them through until spring. Violet preserved the garden's final harvest, filling the root cellar with jars of vegetables, fruits, and jams that would brighten winter meals. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the landscape overnight into a pristine wonderland that delighted the twins and fascinated baby Daniel, now nearly 4 months old and growing more alert by the day. Violet stood at the window watching the children Emma and Sarah bundled in coats and mittens, shrieking with joy as they built a snowman under Wade's direction while Daniel observed from the safety of her arms, his dark eyes wide with wonder at the white world outside. It's beautiful, isn't it? She murmured to the baby, your first snow. As if in agreement, Daniel cooed and reached a chubby hand toward the window. Violet pressed a kiss to his downy head, inhaling the sweet scent that was uniquely his. Her heart felt so full it might overflow, a far cry from the despair that had engulfed her when she stood on those church steps back in April, cast out and alone. The sound of the front door opening brought her attention back to the present as Wade and the twins stomped inside, bringing with them a gust of cold air and the clean scent of snow. "Did you see us, Mama?" Sarah called, her cheeks rosy with cold and excitement. "We made a snow family." "I saw," Violet confirmed with a smile. "It looks wonderful." "Papa said we could have hot chocolate," Emma informed her importantly, struggling out of her wet mittens. "With cinnamon like you make it, did he now?" Violet raised an eyebrow at Wade, who grinned unrepentantly as he helped the girls out of their snow-dampened outer clothing. "Thought we deserved a reward for our hard work," he explained. "Besides, it's not every day we get the first snow of the season." As Violet prepared the promised treat, she watched Wade with the children, the easy way he interacted with the twins, the gentle confidence with which he now held Daniel, who had ended up in his arms while Violet worked at the stove. This was what family should be, she thought. Not the rigid conformity and harsh judgment she had experienced in the church, but this warm acceptance, this love that expanded to include all who needed it. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into winter stillness, Violet found Wade in his study, a ledger open before him as he calculated the ranch's prospects for the coming year. "How does it look?" she asked, setting a cup of tea beside him. Wade sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Tight, but we'll manage. The new calf crop was strong this year and beef prices are holding steady." He smiled up at her gratefully. "Thanks for the tea." Violet hesitated, then perched on the edge of his desk, something she would never have dared do in the early days of their acquaintance. "Wade, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." His expression grew attentive. "What is it?" "Christmas is coming," she began, "and I was thinking, perhaps we could invite some people from town. Dr. Thompson, maybe, and a few others who were kind to me. Not a large gathering, just dinner and some carols." She twisted her hands in her lap nervously. "It's been so long since I've been to Central City, and the twins miss seeing other children." Wade studied her thoughtfully. "Are you sure you want to face the town gossips again? Things have quieted down with time and distance, but you know how people can be." "I'm sure," Violet said with more conviction than she felt. "We can't hide away forever, Wade. This is our home, and I want our children to be part of the community, not isolated from it." Wade reached for her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "If that's what you want, then we'll do it. A proper McAllister Christmas with all the trimmings." The relief and gratitude Violet felt at his immediate support brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you." Wade tugged gently on her hand, drawing her from the desk into his lap. It was a liberty he rarely took, their physical relationship still developing in gradual, respectful steps. "You're a remarkable woman, Violet McAllister," he said softly. "Braver than you give yourself credit for." Violet leaned into his embrace, allowing herself to rest against the solid strength of him. "Not brave," she corrected. "Just stubborn, remember?" Wade's laugh rumbled through his chest against her cheek. "Determined," he amended, echoing her own correction from months before. Their faces were close now, breath mingling in the quiet intimacy of the moment. When Wade's lips met hers, it was with a tenderness that spoke of reverence rather than passion, though Violet could feel the careful restraint in his touch. Their kisses had been relatively few since their wedding, affectionate but brief, mindful of her recovery from childbirth and the constant presence of children. But this kiss lingered, deepening gradually as Violet's arms wound around his neck and Wade's hand came up to cradle her cheek. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Violet," he said simply. "I should have told you before now." The words, so plainly spoken yet so profound, washed through her like a warm wave. "I love you too," she whispered back, the truth of it resonating in every fiber of her being. Wade's smile illuminated his entire face. "Then I'd say we have everything we need, wouldn't you?" As Violet nodded her agreement, she marveled at how far they had come from strangers thrown together by circumstance to partners bound by choice. And now, by love freely given and received. It wasn't the path she had envisioned for herself when she first arrived in Central City with dreams of a respectable new life, but it was infinitely more precious for being unexpected. The Christmas gathering Violet had proposed became reality on a clear, cold evening the week before the holiday. The ranch house gleamed with lamplight, evergreen boughs decorated every available surface, and delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen where Violet and Mrs. Gunderson had spent the day preparing a feast. To Violet's surprise and gratification, nearly everyone they had invited accepted Dr. Thompson and his wife, the blacksmith's family with 3 children close to the twins' age, 2 neighboring ranchers and their wives, and even Mrs. Hargrove from the boarding house, who arrived bearing an enormous fruitcake and visible curiosity about Violet's new circumstances. "My word, the place looks lovely," Mrs. Hargrove exclaimed as Wade took her coat. "And is this the little one I've heard about?" Her gaze fell on Daniel, resplendent in a new outfit Violet had sewn specifically for the occasion, cradled in his mother's arms. "This is our son, Daniel," Violet confirmed, watching carefully for the older woman's reaction. To her relief, Mrs. Hargrove's expression softened as she regarded the baby. "He has your eyes, Mrs. McAllister. May I?" She held out her arms, and after only a slight hesitation, Violet transferred Daniel to her. "He's a fine-looking boy," Mrs. Hargrove pronounced, bouncing him gently. "You must be very proud." "We are," Wade said, appearing at Violet's side and placing a supportive hand at the small of her back. The simple statement, delivered with unmistakable sincerity, brought warmth to Violet's cheeks, and a surge of gratitude for this man who had so completely accepted her child as his own. The evening progressed more smoothly than Violet had dared hope. The adults conversed companionably while the children played games organized by Emma and Sarah, who took their hosting duties very seriously. After dinner, someone suggested carols, and Dr. Thompson's wife was persuaded to play the small pump organ Wade had acquired years ago for his sister. As the familiar songs filled the room, Violet looked around at the gathering, at Wade deep in conversation with the blacksmith, at the twins teaching a clapping game to their new friends, at Daniel being passed adoringly from one neighbor to another, and felt a sense of belonging she had thought lost forever when the church doors closed behind her that fateful Sunday. "You've created something special here," Dr. Thompson observed quietly, joining her by the window where she stood watching the scene. "A real home." "Wade created it," Violet demurred. "I'm just fortunate to be part of it." The doctor shook his head. "No, Mrs. McAllister. What I see tonight is the work of both of you together." He hesitated, then added, "I've always regretted my silence that day in church. I should have spoken up." Violet touched his arm briefly. "You're here now, Doctor. That's what matters." As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Mrs. Hargrove approached Violet privately. "I wanted to say," she began, then seemed to reconsider her words. "That is, I hope you'll consider visiting town occasionally. The church has a new preacher now, younger, less rigid in his views. And there are those of us who would welcome you back." The invitation, however tentatively extended, moved Violet deeply. "Thank you, Mrs. Hargrove. Perhaps after the worst of winter passes." Later, As she and Wade prepared for bed, now sharing the master bedroom upstairs, Daniel's cradle nearby, Violet recounted the conversation. "Would you want to go back?" Wade asked, his tone carefully neutral. "To church, I mean." Violet considered the question seriously as she brushed her hair, watching Wade's reflection in the mirror. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "My faith hasn't wavered, but my trust in those who claim to represent it has." She set down her brush and turned to face him. "What do you think?" Wade sat on the edge of the bed, thoughtful. "I think faith is between a person and their God," he said slowly. "No man has the right to stand in judgment of that relationship." He looked up at her, his expression open and sincere. "But I also think community matters. If this new preacher is truly different, perhaps it's worth considering for the children, if nothing else." Violet crossed to him, drawn by the wisdom and gentleness that had first attracted her to this unassuming rancher. "How did you become so wise, Wade McAllister?" she asked, taking his hands in hers. "Not wisdom," he corrected with a small smile. "Just experience. I've seen too much of life to believe in absolutes or easy judgments." He tugged her gently closer until she stood between his knees. "Besides, a man who's been blessed with a second chance at happiness tends to recognize the hand of grace when he sees it." Violet's heart swelled with love for him, this quiet, steadfast man who had offered her shelter when she needed it most, and had ended up giving her so much more. A home, a family, and a love she had stopped believing was possible. "Merry Christmas, Wade," she whispered, leaning down to kiss him. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. McAllister," he returned when they parted, his eyes reflecting the same deep contentment she felt in her own heart. Spring came early to the Colorado foothills in 1877, the snow retreating up the mountainsides by late March, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Daniel, now 10 months old, had mastered crawling and was pulling himself up on furniture, determined to keep pace with his adored older sisters. The twins, approaching their 6th birthday, had blossomed under Violet's care, their reading improving steadily and their natural curiosity encouraged rather than stifled. On a warm April morning, almost exactly a year after Violet had first arrived at the ranch, Wade announced at breakfast that he needed to make a trip into Central City for supplies. "Would you and the children like to come along?" he asked Violet. "It's a fine day for an outing, and Daniel's old enough to manage the journey now." Violet hesitated only briefly. Since Christmas, they had made several short trips to town, each easier than the last as the initial stares and whispers gradually gave way to ordinary greetings and conversations. Still, she had yet to attend a church service, though the twins occasionally went with Wade or neighbors. "Yes," she decided, smiling at the twins' immediate excitement. "I think that would be lovely." They made a family expedition of it, the wagon packed with children, a picnic lunch, and empty crates for the supplies Wade needed. As they approached Central City, Violet felt a familiar tightening in her chest, not quite anxiety, but a heightened awareness of how much had changed since she had last regularly walked these streets. Wade seemed to sense her tension. "We don't have to stay long," he assured her quietly as the twins chattered excitedly about the sweets they hoped to purchase at the general store. "It's all right," Violet replied, straightening her shoulders. "This town was my home once. Perhaps it can be again in a different way." They completed Wade's errands first. Lumber from the sawmill, seeds for spring planting, a few tools from the blacksmith. Everywhere they went, the family attracted attention, not the condemning stares Violet had feared, but curious and often friendly interest. Several people stopped to admire Daniel, now sitting proudly in Violet's lap, his dark curls and bright eyes drawing compliments from even former skeptics. "He's growing like a weed," Mrs. Peterson from the millinery shop observed. Those McAllister men always were sturdy stock. The casual acceptance of Daniel as Wade's son, whether genuine or merely polite, warmed Violet's heart. By the time they stopped for their picnic lunch in the small park near the center of town, her earlier tension had largely dissipated. As they were packing up their lunch things, Violet noticed Wade watching the church across the street, where people were beginning to gather for the midweek service. "Would you like to attend?" she asked, following his gaze. Wade looked at her in surprise. "I wouldn't ask that of you, Violet." "Not after." "I think it's time," she said with quiet determination. "Emma and Sarah have been asking why we don't go to church together, and I'd like to meet this new preacher everyone speaks so highly of." Wade studied her face, clearly searching for any sign of reluctance or fear. Finding none, he nodded. "If you're certain." "I am," Violet confirmed, gathering Daniel into her arms as Wade helped the twins tidy the last of their picnic. Together, the family crossed the street to the church, the same building where Violet had faced public humiliation a year before, now transformed by fresh paint and the colorful spring flowers planted along its walkway. Several people greeted them as they approached, including Dr. Thompson and his wife, who expressed pleasure at seeing the entire McAllister family. The new preacher, Reverend Parker, was standing at the door welcoming his congregation, a man perhaps 10 years younger than Reverend Simmons had been, with a friendly smile and none of his predecessors' stern countenance. "Mr. and Mrs. McAllister," he greeted them warmly, shaking Wade's hand and inclining his head respectfully to Violet. "And these must be the famous twins I've heard so much about, and young Master Daniel as well. It's a pleasure to welcome you all today." His genuine welcome, devoid of judgment or reservation, eased the last of Violet's anxiety. As they entered the church, she was struck by how different it looked, brighter somehow, with fresh curtains at the windows and children's drawings displayed on a board near the Sunday school room. They found seats near the back, where Daniel would disturb fewer people if he became restless. As they settled in, Violet became aware of curious glances from some of the congregation, but also of nods and smiles from others. Mrs. Hargrove, seated across the aisle, gave them a particularly pleased look. Reverend Parker began the service with a warm welcome to all, making no special mention of the McAllisters, but including them naturally in his greeting to visitors. His sermon was on the parable of the Good Samaritan, a pointed choice, Violet thought, though delivered without heavy-handed moralization. Instead, the young preacher emphasized the radical nature of Jesus' command to love thy neighbor, challenging his listeners to consider who they might be excluding from their definition of neighbor. "Christ calls us not to judgment but to compassion," Reverend Parker concluded. "Not to build walls but to tear them down. Let us be a community that reflects that teaching in all we do." As the final hymn ended and the congregation began to disperse, Violet felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find a young woman she didn't recognize, holding the hand of a small boy about 3 years old. "Mrs. McAllister?" the woman asked hesitantly. "I'm Lydia Fletcher. I wanted to thank you for coming today." Violet smiled politely, though confused by the stranger's gratitude. "You're welcome, though I'm not sure why you're thanking me." Lydia glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then lowered her voice. "Because seeing you here gives me hope. I'm in a situation similar to what yours was. My husband died in a mining accident 6 months ago, and I recently discovered I'm expecting." She blushed deeply. "The child isn't his. There was someone after. The town doesn't know yet, but they will soon enough. Understanding dawned, and Violet reached out to squeeze the young widow's hand. "If you ever need someone to talk to, Mrs. Fletcher, please know you're welcome at our home." Tears welled in Lydia's eyes. "Thank you. Reverend Parker has been kind, but it helps to see someone who's come through the other side," Violet suggested gently. Lydia nodded gratefully. "Exactly." As the young woman departed with her son, Wade rejoined Violet, having been engaged in conversation with the blacksmith. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting Violet's pensive expression. "More than all right," she assured him, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm as they collected the children and made their way outside. "I just realized something important." "What's that?" Violet paused on the church steps, the very spot where, a year ago, she had stood alone and desperate before Wade appeared in her life. That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we're brave enough to keep going. She smiled up at him, this man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. And that God does indeed know our hearts better than we know them ourselves sometimes. Wade's expression softened as he understood the significance of where they stood. "He brought you to me," he said simply. "For that, I'll be forever grateful." With Daniel secure in one arm, Violet reached for Wade's hand with her free one. Together, the McAllister family descended the steps and walked into the bright spring sunshine, leaving behind the shadows of judgment and finding their way forward in the light of understanding, acceptance, and love. 5 years later, on a golden autumn day, Violet McAllister stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching her husband and children in the meadow beyond. Daniel, now 6 and as sturdy as Wade had been at that age, was attempting to ride a gentle pony under his father's watchful guidance. The twins, 11 and sprouting like weeds, were taking turns with the riding lesson, their dark braids flying as they ran circles around the patient animal. Beside Violet, in a small cradle, 3-month-old Catherine Rose McAllister slept peacefully, her rosebud mouth occasionally working in dreams of milk and comfort. She was the image of her father, with Wade's clear gray eyes and the same cowlick at the crown that made his hair stand up stubbornly each morning. So much had changed in the years since that desperate day when Violet had been cast out of the church. The ranch had prospered under Wade's careful management and Violet's thrifty housekeeping. They had added a wing to the house to accommodate their growing family, and Wade had hired additional hands to help with the expanding herd. Central City, too, had changed. The mining boom was fading, but the town had established itself as a supply center for the surrounding ranches and farms. Reverend Parker had built a strong, inclusive congregation that focused more on service than on judgment. Violet had gradually become involved, teaching Sunday school and helping organize care for those in need, including, over the years, several young women in circumstances similar to what hers had been. "Mama, look," Daniel called, drawing Violet's attention back to the present. Her son was sitting straight and proud on the pony, guiding it in a small circle without Wade's hand on the lead rope. "I'm doing it myself." "Well done," Violet called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. Though Daniel knew the basic facts of his birth, that Wade had become his father through marriage, rather than biology, the bond between them was as strong as any blood relation. Wade had never once treated Daniel differently from Catherine, and the boy adored his father with unquestioning devotion. As she watched, Wade lifted Daniel from the pony to make way for Sarah's turn, settling the boy on his shoulders with practiced ease. They made their way toward the house, Wade's long stride eating up the distance while Daniel chattered excitedly about his riding achievement. "Did you see, Mama?" Daniel asked as they reached the porch steps. "I saw," Violet confirmed, reaching up to ruffle his dark curls so like her own. "You're becoming quite the horseman." "Papa says when I'm 7 I can have a real horse of my own," Daniel informed her importantly. "Not just the pony." "Is that so?" Violet raised an eyebrow at Wade, who grinned unrepentantly. "Every ranch boy needs his own horse," he defended himself, lifting Daniel down from his shoulders. "Besides, he's a natural rider." "Like his father," Violet said softly, the words carrying layers of meaning between them. Wade's expression gentled, the love they had built over years of partnership evident in his eyes. "Speaking of fathers," he said, bending to look into the cradle at their sleeping daughter. "This little miss seems to have her papa wrapped around her tiny finger already." "Just like her brothers and sisters," Violet teased, leaning into Wade's side as his arm circled her waist. Together they watched Emma and Sarah taking turns on the pony, their confidence and skill testament to years of patient teaching by Wade. Violet thought of how far they had all come, not just in circumstances, but in the deeper ways that truly mattered. The twins had grown from bewildered, motherless little girls into confident young women to be. Daniel had never known anything but love and belonging. And Catherine would grow up in a family, bound together not merely by blood but by choice and commitment. "Penny for your thoughts?" Wade asked, noticing her reflective mood. Violet smiled up at him, this man who had become the center of her world in ways she could never have imagined when she first saw him leaning against that hitching post outside the church. "I was just thinking how fortunate we are," she said simply. "And how grateful I am that you stopped that day to help a woman in trouble." Wade's arm tightened around her waist. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. As they stood together watching their children, Violet reflected that life rarely followed the paths we expect. Sometimes it led through dark valleys of despair, but those same paths could ultimately bring us to heights of joy we never thought possible. Her journey had taught her that true faith wasn't found in rigid rules or public performances of piety, but in the quiet moments of compassion and acceptance, in the words Wade had spoken to her that first day, words that had changed everything. "God knows your heart." And in knowing her heart, God had led her home.